welcome back to the L1 show. Today is 7:30 and we're doing government and security stories to start the week.
Let's start with the FTC doing something that seems just good. What? Yes, we're getting more and more of that lately.
The FTC launches a probe into the surveillance pricing, quote unquote, that it says it links cost to customer data. Now, we've covered in the past where the FTC has done this at the macroscopic scale, where Amazon is looking at Walmart or Best Buy or whatever to do pricing. This is also looking at you. What are you, the individual, willing to pay for something? Do you see different prices if you're in incognito or not? The FTC is going to be shocked when they get to the airline industry.
Now, the president appoints the FCC chair, right? Is that true for the FTC as well?
I think so.
Probably.
Lena Khan has got no revolving door. What is she going to do? Because she's going to get replaced, right? That's going to be bad because the next person is going to see that and they'll be like, oh, I shouldn't make these people angry, which is what we need. And T-Mobile, it's interesting because the FCC, didn't they telegraph this a couple of months ago? And T-Mobile looked at that and they were like, we don't care.
Yeah. FCC blasts T-Mobile's 365-day phone locking and proposes a 60-day unlock rule. T-Mobile says, no, that's not reasonable. We think people will steal phones.
That's true. It's not reasonable. 0. That's the reasonable number. Anything above that, solidly unreasonable.
Well, one of the things that happened that carriers pointed to as the reason for needing this is that people would hack other people's T-Mobile accounts and then sign up for a bunch of lines to get the free iPhones and then pick up the iPhones. And then somebody would be like, why did my bill go up to $800 a month? And T-Mobile would say, you added 7 new lines. And the person would say, no, I didn't. And then it would be a mess. But perhaps that stems from T-Mobile's bad security in the first place.
Or
just
that.
How about a bad business model? That deal doesn't make any sense, does it? There's a loophole. Now this one it's a long explanation. We have talked about this a lot and for a long time because this has been percolating for a long time. It's amazing though that it was already really bad and they're working hard to push it even further in that direction.
Congress really, really wants to let private companies own the law. And by private companies owning the law, that means that the companies that come up with standards for things own the standard, and it's only published by the one person in a manner they deem fit. Although they did squeak in some language that's like, well, it'll be available online, maybe, into the law. And so when you do that, it incentivizes companies to come up with really elaborate laws because they're coming up with the standards. See also the National Electric Code or the National Plumbing Code. It's like, no, these things should be open. You should be able to do with it whatever you want. Take a copy of it and rehost it yourself. And for some reason, that seems like not an okay thing to do.
But see, it's even worse than that because they're writing the laws, which are bloated and onerous, and then they summarize those laws and copyright the summaries. And we have covered stories in the past where do-gooders were like, this doesn't make any sense. This is the law. It should be for the people. I'll subscribe and reprint it. And guess what happens to them?
Yeah.
Nothing good. And so this is literally, we let the corporations write the laws, then we let them own the access to the laws.
And then we get in trouble when we don't know the laws because we don't have access to them.
A lot of the time, too, as taxpayers, we have paid for companies to do these kinds of things. Certainly, like research, we paid for research, and then Aaron Schwartz was like, wait a minute, taxpayer money paid for these things. I should make them available on the internet for free. And then a prosecutor was like, I'm going to bully you until you no longer want to live.
And destroying the free internet is certainly at the top of the list for the leaders of the world. That's exactly what they're looking to do here.
Ron Wyden has secured a Kids Online Safety Act win, but he's actually going to vote no because he recognized how onerous and terrible it was.
I think it's because he didn't get his pork that he wanted, right? And some of his enemies did.
And that means no one can have anything because that's the way it works.
Because we could never do one law at a time. They must always be rolled into a law burrito.
Yeah, this was a thing.
It's compelling commentary right there.
That's what they subscribe for. Patreon and float playing, Level 1.
And this was a thing about seeing other people's things, except not really their things, but close enough that maybe it's still a problem.
AOC's deepfake AI porn bill unanimously passes the Senate.
Demonetized.
Basically, yeah. There's a lot of things. Probably more likely for AOC than the other thing, which is crazy. But yeah, so this is criminal consequences if you do this and it harms someone, which I would have thought that under existing laws, harming someone in this way, but this makes it worse.
I don't know where the line is here. I'm hoping, I didn't read the law. I don't feel like this is going to catch me up in it. I'm not generating deep fakes of any kind. But I hope that there's something here that says that you have to show intent that was her, right? Or that was the person. And not just like, oh, that looks a little bit like me. You go to jail or something like that. It is a reprehensible thing to do. And the trade wars are going hot, and it seems like our efforts against China haven't really added up. China has dodged it. They've developed their own stuff. They seem to be doing okay. We need to go further, apparently.
The U.S. urges a vigilance by tech startups and venture capital firms on foreign funds.
So China's apparently pretty good at worming their way into startups and putting somebody in there who's kind of a sleeper. Or at least that's what's being accused here. And they're worried about that. But when you're a startup, you're taking money from anybody you can.
Yeah.
Certainly that's the thing that happens with encryption standards.
That's the whole Belt and Road thing. That's like China's MO, right? They just give you a bunch of money and then they call those favors in later.
Let's juxtapose this with when the oil industry started.
No, we would never do that. USA. Oh, one documentary's like, why do we have an American flag on the table? It's because it's the Olympic opening.
Anybody eat pineapple this week? Because there's a similar story. And new robots that will be apparently kicking at our doors.
The DHS has a denial of service robot that disables the Internet of Things to booby trap inside homes.
That's a weird headline.
Or if you're a cynic, and I can't believe 404 Media doesn't touch on this enough, if you have cameras inside your house, like the whole Jamie Thomas thing, like the whole, and you see...
What's the rapper?
Which one?
The one where they ate the cake that was in his house, and he filmed it all, and he released it as a music video.
Oh, that was incredible.
I can't remember his name.
They disabled his cameras manually, but he had more other cameras that they didn't disable in order for, it's like there's one set of cameras that's there for you to find, but there was yet another set of cameras, which is amazing that he was so cynical that he did that. But then it turned out he was justified in doing that.
Does that make you cynical at that point? It just makes you a
makes
realist.
you right.
Yeah. So you might be thinking, well, okay, why would they need these now? If you read the press release, it's like, oh, dangerous Internet of Things booby traps, right? You got like a spike pit, maybe a giant
moat. It looks like
boulder.
he's in a moat in there.
You got a giant boulder that's triggered by your Ring door camera. None of that has ever happened. There's the one case that they reference here is that one guy had a Ring doorbell, and he saw that they were coming in, and he prepared himself for that. And so that has become robot dogs with jammers on them.
Don't spots start at like 70,000? Who knows how expensive these are?
Oh yeah, for sure. This is not a spot. This is a knockoff.
I'm sorry. Is it illegal for me to have something to bear witness to reality here, so that you can't lie about the circumstances? Because how often has that happened? A lot.
And this does not stop at your doorstep. The United States government wants to stop all of the cameras.
U.S. prepares jamming devices targeting Russian and Chinese satellites. Whoever they contacted about this was very clear that, no, we don't want to destroy them. We just want to make sure that they're not functional whenever we decide.
But I think that is purely because they know that destroying them causes Kessler syndrome. And that's going to hurt our satellites. So this is interesting. They have some locations which they are already deploying these, but then they also have mobile versions. So we can mobile satellite block eventually, I guess. That's going to suck if war breaks out and then everything just goes blank. We got no communication.
Well, yeah. The military will still have communications. We will not.
Right. Well, no, I'm saying
Yeah.
China and Russia would be
Yeah.
turning off of our stuff.
Good thing all my door sensors are wired.
Man, that robot dog would have no problem getting into your house.
Yeah.
Once all the satellites went down. And CrowdStrike, it seems like it's over. We've lived through the worst IT disaster of our lifetimes. And now it's just time to mop up. I don't think there's a lot of question at this point, right? I think we understand the situation.
Yeah.
Do we need this?
CrowdStrike CEO to testify about the massive outage that halted flights in hospitals. Well, sirs, it turns out that all of our digital infrastructure is very fragile and poorly made. It's made out of paper mache and chewed bubble gum. And that's basically how everything is. And ours happened to be the toothpick that collapsed under the weight. But it could have literally been anybody else's toothpick.
But we use Bazooka Joe gum, so like we're better than the other guys at least.
And those fearless leaders of ours, again, they're really attracted to the layups, aren't they? The questions that are already answered.
U.S. opens investigation into Delta after airline cancels thousands of flights. Conveniently, Delta is going to have some IT companies to blame for the outage.
We know what happened. It's been explained. Why
Is this just them making a paper trail so they can
This is an
come
election
down?
year.
Yeah.
This is sound bites.
This is going to lead to, like, we were studying the standards, and it's like there's a financial incentive for companies to come up with standards. There's going to be a company that does not actually make any of this software or work in this infrastructure, or they don't work a lot, and they're going to come up with standards that then everybody has to comply with that makes everything run slower and be worse.
It has backdoors.
Yeah. Not that we don't need standards. We definitely do, but we need a concerted effort to earnestly do them, and it is going to be co-opted by the worst of us.
Like our government. And let's talk about the one that came, I guess this was not even the last one. It was probably the one before the last one, right? But the other big outage that hurt everything, we are now finally getting some answers about that. But we're also bickering in Washington, as we usually do. Who's in charge?
Judge in the SolarWinds case rejects the SEC oversight of cybersecurity controls. This is good, because when the SEC did this, I was sort of asking myself, the SEC is in charge of cybersecurity now? What?
They're like, they got a taste of that Bitcoin power, and they were like, yeah, I like this.
Doesn't the Chevron ruling here also mean that the SEC's decision to do all this stuff for crypto platforms goes away?
I think that probably weighed into it, right? Because if it went to court, that ain't going to work anymore.
Coinbase needs to be filing some new appeals. Good Lord.
And is Facebook just a information database? Is it just something that tells you things, or does it actively participate in your use of social media? The courts have been arguing about this for a long time. For once, they seem to be going with they are not just a store of information.
Social media platforms that mine user data aren't shielded by federal communications law, California court says. So this is if somebody posts something to your platform and it is, dangerous or, illegal or whatever, terrorist propaganda, and you mine that for data. Because you mined it for data, you should have noticed that it was the forbidden content and take it down, which is an interesting reasoning. But I
don't know. I kind of like it because not on the face of it, but it creates a nice loophole that says, oh, you don't want to be responsible for the 230 stuff? Don't look at it. If we can prove you looked at it, you're on the hook. That would destroy the business model, but be good for the consumer. And global tax. I don't like the sound of that, but a lot of people do.
Reuters headline is Digital Tax Talks in the G20 Spotlight as the U.S. tariff threat looms. We've got a lot of stories this week about global tax and global revenue stuff, and it occurred to me that since the early 2000s to now, with all of the AI stuff, companies are now getting 10 to 1 done with labor. We have not seen that in government. Taxes must go up. And the impetus for global tax is to have more money to do more things. Meanwhile, improvements in manufacturing and in the industrial sector mean that we can get a lot more done with a lot less. Weirdly, that doesn't seem to be happening with government.
I can give you a real simple explanation for that. All that time when we were increasing that industrialization and output, we were spending right now's money. So we've been spending so far ahead of the curve that we'll never catch up.
We would have to have more than exponential growth in order to catch up, is what you're saying?
Yeah, because the spending always outpaces the growth.
That doesn't seem like that'll happen, especially if we have breakthrough on an AGI. It seems like the curve will reverse.
Don't think about it.
Historically, it's literally never happened. It ends in war and hyperinflation. And non-compete agreements. Now, that's an interesting one. I'm not sure where I'd stand on it because it is a contract that you sign. But on the other hand, it is a nasty, nasty way to do business. And if everybody does it, is that...
You have to work.
Yeah.
U.S. judge will not block Biden administration ban on worker and non-compete agreements. So this is the third round in the U.S. court system, but this is good news for workers. There are some exceptions for managerial or people that have a lot of privileged information, but mostly this is good for the American worker.
Since the worm has turned in the narrative about Biden, they're choosing some terrible pictures of him. Have you noticed that? None of them are flattering anymore.
I haven't noticed. I feel like I've seen both flattering and unflattering of both of them. I've seen pictures of them all over the place, and I don't want to see them. I'm looking for cat pictures when I'm on the internet.
That would be true of all of us, right? We've all got, I don't know how many flatterings I pull off, but anyway, let's move on to the EU or Europe in general, not just the EU. And food delivery, which I just cannot fathom how it's such a big business when we're supposed to all be broke because it's such a terrible value.
People do it, though.
People do
I know
it.
people who do it multiple times a week, which I'm like, I don't understand that.
But prices just keep going up. Could there be more of an explanation there than just inflation?
EU to investigate Delivery Hero and Glovo over food delivery cartel concerns. Yes, food delivery cartel concerns. I don't understand any of these applications on a fundamental level. The technology to connect someone who wants Taco Bell with someone who is willing to go and get that person Taco Bell is not a lot of technology involved there. It's pennies to execute on that transaction. And so these platforms being worth $500 million or $1 billion doesn't make any sense. It's a race to the bottom. Some rando 13-year-old that's precocious and knows how to use Amazon Web Services will build something that literally does that.
Well, I can explain it to you. What you described is very easy. What's difficult is convincing someone to make that transaction for 40% over the value of that transaction, which they seem to be really good at because people are doing it.
That's where the expense comes from.
It's all the marketing tricks and order now.
Yeah, the dark patterns on the sites, screwing the drivers with weird like shift changes and modifications.
So they don't get enough
stuff.
money, yeah.
In a utopian world, sure, we would have people willing to get the food and people willing to pay to get the food. But instead, you have to scrape. You having no value have to scrape value. That's why we get this. And it's also why we get pay for Facebook, because they have to scrape value out of that interaction, and they usually do it from you directly.
Ars Technica's headline is Meta risks sanctions over sneaky ad-free plans confusing users, the European Union says. Basically, if you want to use Meta products without ads, you can pay for them, but it turns out that there's dark patterns and that Meta doesn't really want you to bother with paying for it.
Because they want to be able to sell your data.
It's kind of, they're trying to just convince you to say yes to the ads, basically, is what that payment is.
This kind of thing also makes me want to rethink my mental model of how much money they can make from someone's data, because I hadn't imagined that it was a lot. In my mind, Meta directly collecting like $5 per year from a person would be worth way more than the advertising profile.
But now they have to worry about stuff like AI, and it's like, ooh, that's way more useful as training data.
Yeah.
Your posts are useful as training data.
I think it was still way more useful than valuable than $5.
Probably, yeah.
As ad data. Oh, it had to be.
Yeah.
They made a lot of money.
Yeah.
They did quite well. They still are.
Or the ad industry hasn't figured out that it's not worth that.
But I think some of them, I think the smart ones have figured that out. But what do? Do you announce that and be like, oh, hey, I have no value?
Please get rid of me. I know we're doing layoffs.
I think when you have large brands see that, you have companies like Unilever buying media companies.
It's Pfizer, but yes.
Or Pfizer, yeah.
They don't buy them. They just buy all the ads.
Well,
it's a lot easier to manage that way. And Switzerland, let's all celebrate Switzerland. Unless there's some hidden barb that I don't see here, this sounds like a beautiful plan.
Switzerland now requires all government software to be open source. They've had it. They've had it with broken incompatibility. They've had it with the adversarial nature of licensing software. It's like, nope. We're just going to spend the money that it takes to make this thing work in an open source kind of a way.
I like to think that there was somebody in the Swiss government who's had this email for months, maybe longer than that. And then they woke up to the CrowdStrike headline and they were like, send? Now is the time.
And then they dabbed like it was 2016.
And again, the Chinese trade war has driven major changes in the way that everybody does business. And when it comes to China, what they're willing to tell us about their business.
China is getting secretive about its supercomputers. This is because, according to the headline and the article, it's getting good. But I think it's much more pragmatic than that. It's like China can build their supercomputers out of rocks and sticks. And they would like the U.S. to not sanction their ability to buy rocks and sticks.
Was this a repeat story? Or did we have a second story about this? Am I imagining that?
3 days ago, I might have cut a paywall.
Oh, okay. Maybe this is a paywall alternative.
More and more sites pick up paywalls. Ones that I think are safe.
Oh, yeah.
You'll go to read it, and then it's not. And China also celebrating this past week because guess what they didn't have?
China did not swerved. China swerved the worst of the global tech meltdown as a result of CrowdStrike because they don't use CrowdStrike. Even though they use Windows, they don't really use CrowdStrike. They don't use a lot of Western companies. In order to do business in China, you have to have a Chinese subsidiary that you do business through. And that's true of even just Microsoft.
And that company didn't use any kind of CrowdStrike. They didn't have all the same tech stack, which is interesting. Worked for them this time. And that is not true of all of the Asian countries. Some of the smaller ones did buy into the whole technology stack, and they suffered just like the rest of the world. But their economies maybe can't absorb quite as much as ours can.
Malaysia asks Microsoft and CrowdStrike to consider covering losses from global outrage. Or global outage.
Well, also outrage.
Both work.
Yeah.
This was, again...
Best we could do is a $10 gift card.
They didn't send that to customers. They sent that to IT people, but that's still in poor taste.
Yeah, it's really poor taste.
I bet nobody in Malaysia got one.
Were you trapped in Malaysia for an extra week? Here's your $10 gift card.
Oh, thanks. That didn't cover my lunch, but...
And it's interesting how different countries are either embracing or shunning AI. And even in the case of the UK, for example, when one leader leaves and another one comes in, it flip-flops. Japan is very decidedly on one side of this court.
Japanese media say AI search infringes copyright and urge legal reform. So basically somebody looked at this and said, wait a minute, this can't be real. The AI search will take your work and then summarize it, and that no law has been violated. And, well, technically, no, not yet, not currently.
Now this one is a little older. Did we talk about this last week?
We talked a little bit about unrest, but not this.
Yeah, I didn't see this until this week.
This is the playbook. When the people rise up, what's the first thing that you do as a despotic leader?
Bangladesh is experiencing a near total internet shutdown amid student protests. And this is going to be interesting contrast to another story that Ryan added about Russia, when Russia first got set up on the internet.
They have walked all of these back. Well, no, they didn't walk it all the way back. It was supposed to be that if companies had to hire 30% ex-military, no matter what. Now they've taken that down to 7%. And online gambling, it's not something that is allowed in a lot of Western countries, but there's all these little loopholes where you can just go and establish yourself on one of these little islands somewhere, and they tolerate it. But it seems like that might have been a little slippery slope. It might have attracted some other rodents, and they don't like that.
Philippines shutters its online gambling industry amid tax evasion and human trafficking concerns. So the Philippines looked at this, and apparently they did not like what they found, so they shut down the entire industry.
I don't understand quite how online gambling results in human trafficking. Why are we bringing humans?
Do you gamble the humans away?
Was it a way to launder money?
One thing I have seen before is that online gambling, because how do you trust it, right? Sometimes they'll have cameras on human beings dealing the cards. So maybe they're trafficking those people? If you know anything about that, let us know in the comments. And this is what you were alluding to. I'd never heard of this guy before.
I didn't know him either.
It's interesting, and I don't know enough about the politics of Russia, but it just seems like he was maybe a little too outspoken.
Yeah.
Is that what
Yeah.
you got from this?
The headline is "The Criminal in Jail's the Father of Russia's Internet."
It sounds like he wasn't really even involved
yeah,
in this.
Andrei Solodotov and Irina Borogun.
One of them is related.
Yeah, the article's a little biased.
Well, they do point it out. They're like,
Yeah.
one of the authors here is this person's child. So
They put the 72-year-old father in jail because of his son speaking out.
and they say that he's in terrible health, and
And
they basically sent him to Siberia.
they are not in Russia, the children.
Yeah,
So, yeah, it seems like the old, if we can't get to you,
we'll punish your
we'll
family.
get to those that you love.
Maybe we could convince Biden or Harris that this would make an excellent movie. Like, just, you don't even have to spend any taxpayer dollars. Just go get Michael Bay or one of those guys and, like, let's make a SEAL Team 6 movie.
Wouldn't we choose a politician that still has relevance?
Oh, yeah, he would probably go for it immediately. It's just like, yes, we're going to just go in and extract this person.
Hey, you think he'd go against Putin? I don't know about that. Oh, but that guy he created the first Russian ISP.
Yeah.
They kind of were like, oh, he invented all this technology. No,
Yeah, it's like, oh, it's not quite right, but
we invented that technology, but he was the first to bring it to Russia.
They did have an interesting thing about how the KGB forgot about that connection, and so people were getting their news from the internet because that was the only one they didn't control.
And he was so powerful, his company was the only company in Russia at one point that had an international phone line.
oh yeah, I saw that, and they were like, it was during like the height of the Cold War too, so they said it was like unheard of.
And Nigeria, it seems that the African countries are catching on that social media and big tech has no defense against any of this. They're guilty of everything. You just have to give them a number.
Nigeria fines Meta $220 million for violating consumer and data laws. And if Meta is making $220 million off of the data that they have from Nigerian users who mostly don't have computers, mostly mobile phones, then how much money there is that? That's way more than $5 a year per person.
They also don't have the kind of like news infrastructure that we do, and they don't have as many informational websites, although those are gone for us now too, right? Their whole world is on this social media stuff, all their payments and everything. So of course Facebook's going to make more from just paying that fine.
My mental model is completely wrong.
And this one was a little bit of a popcorn fart, and it's an older story, but now we're just finding out the details.
Hackers leaked documents from the Pentagon IT services provider Leidos, Bloomberg News reports say. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right. We reported on this when it originally happened. I guess they've sold as many copies of this data as they can on the black market, and so now they're just, leaking bits and pieces.
But the word Pentagon's in there, so it gets you a nice headline. And .top, I don't visit any websites that end in the top level .top, but maybe that's a good thing, and maybe you shouldn't either.
Phish-Friendly domain registry.top put on notice. ICANN said they had until August 24th to get their stuff together and take down domains that are used for phishing, of which there are a lot.
So it's like, yeah, .com has a lot more phishing domains, but then you look at the totals, and you're like, oh, that's quite a bit more of a percentage of the total, isn't it? China operates that. Not the government, but probably the government.
I'm surprised there hasn't been a wealthy person to buy a top-level domain, because it's like $150,000 or something to buy your own top-level domain. And just for the lulz, just for trolling, like .dot, that would be really hilarious. Somebody should do that. Or maybe somebody could finally register clownpenis.fart, which is from an old SNL skit.
Tweet Elon Musk.
He's just throwing money
He
around.
loves stuff like that.
We can finally bring the Dylan Edwards and Associates website to life.
And another supply chain attack. It's so depressing that our world is crumbling because we've made it too complicated.
A hacker, quote unquote, ghost network is quietly spreading malware on GitHub. So 3,000 accounts on GitHub are manipulating repositories. And one of the wildest things, this is a sub thing that this group is doing, is they'll clone an existing legitimate repository and surreptitiously insert malware in it, and that's just all they do.
But more importantly, similar to how you can game the algorithms on social media and stuff, like, share, and subscribe, on GitHub, it's like fork and what are the other two?
Stars.
Oh, yeah, star, like a like. And so the network, or this malware network, is doing a lot of that to try to push those up above the original in popularity. And apparently it's effective. And this is a story that we saw a lot of when this war broke out. God, it's been a depressing amount of time since then, hasn't it?
It
Yes.
has.
But we're still seeing it, and it's still a really nasty thing to do. This one's from a little while ago.
Hackers shut down heating in Ukrainian city with malware, researchers say. So this is the post-mortem on the cleanup for a thing that happened in January. It was 2 days without heating because the malware targeted industrial control systems. It wasn't like CrowdStrike where it was, Windows-connected machines or anything like that. This was actually the industrial automation and safety systems that controlled the citywide boiler heating.
And January, and was this Kiev? Oh, Lviv. Is that how you pronounce that? I don't know. Lviv?
It's a word I read but don't say out loud.
It's a little nippy
Yeah.
at that time of year. I imagine they still had electric heaters, but still,
Yeah.
not everybody did.
There is some connection to, Russia and China in that, they say. But there was also, like, these same kinds of control systems. They were like, let's scan the internet and see if there are other control systems that have this. And they found other control systems that are on the internet that should not be. But they were in other global regions, and so they were unaffected, which suggests that it was targeted.
And speaking of global, companies like to use globalism to hire the cheapest possible workers that they can. And then something like this happens, and they're like, who could have predicted this?
Cyber firm KnowBe4 hired a fake IT worker from North Korea. Oops.
Amazingly, the guy on the left, who looks a little bit more Western, don't you think?
Yeah.
Is the real guy. Guy on the right is the fake AI version. He aced his interview, and it turns out this was one of those Arizona laptop farms. I remember we covered the woman that was running one of those. I wonder if this is part of that.
Ooh, probably.
And he was working away. He got all of his tickets in record time, but he was also installing malware.
He's such a good worker, though. I can't be upset.
But he turns all that money into the North Korean government. So they win either way.
It's not fabulous.
And if you're a Telegram user, you got to be careful what attachments you click on.
Telegram 0 day for Android allowed malicious files to masquerade as videos. Basically, you get a video on Telegram, you open it, and it can install a malware payload, but also still function as a video, which is the surprising thing here.
Is this a template that they just didn't change the green screen out on? Like a stock image?
Maybe.
And they were just like, we don't have time, just put it up with the green screen. Because this is how I'd like Photoshop something out.
Ron lock via Pixels?
It's a stock thing, so I guess maybe they just grabbed a stock image.
Yeah. So you click on the video and be like, oh, you need some extra software to watch this video. And of course, people desperately wanting to watch a video, they're like, okay, I'll click that. That was malware. I think it did play the video, though. And as the CrowdStrike issue was wiping out all of America, one IT team had the stomach drop, but then it was like, oh, wait, this was actually just our fault. We'll be able to fix this quickly.
California officials say that the largest trial court in the U.S. is a victim of a ransomware attack. Curiously, it was timed very similar to the CrowdStrike problem, but this one was actually ransomware. They had to delay a bunch of trials.
But they got it fixed.
Oops.
Sucks if you were waiting for a trial.
California.
Although they do say that, I understand if you're sitting in jail, it might not feel like this, but delaying a trial almost always benefits the defense.
Really? Wonder why.
Some kind of human nature with judges and juries, maybe? I don't know.
Wait a minute. If California has the largest trial court in the U.S. and we get all those reports from California about people not prosecuting thousands of dollars in shoplifting, something ain't right.
A lot of the cities have stopped reporting crimes to the FBI. So those statistics are now skewed. They seem a lot better, but it's because the worst places aren't submitting statistics anymore. I don't know if California is one of those places.
That's a great way to deal with problems. So
Just ignore it. Just stick your head in the sand.
For a very short amount of time.
Come here for more advice. Stick your head in the sand with us on the next episode of the L1 Show. Bye!